Okay, I'm gonna get started. I'm sure there's probably going to be some people joining us as I start, but I want to respect your time. I know that for people on the East Coast, this is a little bit later, at the end of your workday. And on the West Coast, probably people it's around dinner time. So thank you for attending and taking the time. Today, what we're going to do is talk about why you need to understand executive functions. It's something I feel really passionate about. I'm going to try to be really tech savvy tonight. So I'm going to try some new things. So hopefully it's all going to work out. So first thing, I'm going to introduce myself in 1 second, but beforehand, if you can get out your phone and go ahead and hold up your phone with the camera app opened to the QR code. This is going to ask you what your role is when working with students or individuals. Are you a teacher, a tutor, academic coach, ADHD coach, parents, or someone else? So if we could get that information, that would be great. I already see some answers are coming in. So while you guys are doing that, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself and let you know like what got me here. Why am I doing this tonight? So I am Krista Hopp. I'm an executive function, ADHD, and academic coach. A couple of things got me here. First of all, I've had my business for about 9 years as an executive function coach. Been really, really fortunate. We have 3 other coaches that work for the practice. We also do mostly one-to-one coaching, but we also work with a group of at-risk kids in St. Croix, the US Virgin Island, and that has been great. We've been working with them for about a year. But what led me here was actually when I was in graduate school. Back when I was in graduate school for counseling psychology, I was at a research study and we were looking at the development of kids that were born preterm versus full term at Fairfax Hospital in Virginia. And one of the things as I was testing 6-year-olds that I was getting feedback on was parents had a lot of concerns. Their kids were really bright, and they were bright, but they were struggling. And because they did not have a diagnosis, there really was not a lot of help for them, and there weren't a lot of resources out there. So that's really kind of what drove me to become an executive function coach, was this lack of resources for individuals who might not have a diagnosis. The other thing that led me here was a combination of things. First of all, up until working with the research project, and I have my bachelor's is in sociology and my master's is in counseling psychology, I never learned about executive functions. So all that education, and it was never really addressed until I worked for the research study. And then there was an experience when I was with the research study. I was later hired as their research psychologist. I had an intern who was going to a program to be a teacher. She was in a secondary education program, and she wrote a paper on executive function, and she submitted it to her professor. And he just was thrilled. He loved it. He thought it was great information. And he said to her, this is great information, and I'm really surprised I never heard of this before. And so I quickly realized that there were a lot of professionals out there that were working with individuals who didn't know about executive functions. And in my own training in graduate school and even trainings afterwards, unless it was a training that was really based on executive functions, I wasn't getting a lot of in-depth information, some baseline stuff, but nothing in depth. And so that's really kind of what led me to developing this course. I see a couple of familiar names. You probably are very aware that this has been a labor of love. So I've put a lot of time into this, and I'm really excited to kind of share all of this with you today. So it looks like we have some tutors, we have some academic coaches, a lot of ADHD coaches, some parents, and some other professionals. So quite a diverse group, which is great. That's kind of what I was hoping for, to reach as many people as possible. So what we're going to do tonight, first of all, we're going to go over why do I need to be a specialist in executive function? Why is baseline information just not enough? How do I become an executive function specialist? And then I am going to go over some strategies and around some common executive function scenarios, and then we will wrap up with questions. So that's kind of the plan for tonight. Okay, so how often has one of these scenarios happened to you? You're working with a student or an adult, and they have something that they have to do, but they have forgotten it. You know, if it's homework, they didn't write it down in a planner, or Schoology didn't have it up there. They remembered they were assigned something, but they couldn't remember quite what it was. If they do the homework, they leave it at home, or they forget to hit that dreaded Google submit button. That sometimes happens. A student tells you, I don't know. And generally they mean, I don't know. That happens a lot with some of the students that I work with. Even with a plan, a student waits until the last possible minute to start something. We'll only do something in one particular way. I see this a lot with some of my students, but if we're looking at a classroom experience, we're looking at an individual or tutor or a coach who's helping somebody with math, you know, the student only wants to do it the way that their teacher showed them. They don't want to try it a different way because they're not comfortable with that. Individual struggles to write because they cannot get their thoughts together, can tell you verbally exactly what their ideas are, but the minute they have to put it to paper, they really struggle. If one of these things have happened with you, you probably are working with someone who has an executive function deficit. So what is an executive function? So an executive function is a cognitive skill that we use to reach a goal. Seems pretty simple, right? It's located in the prefrontal cortex of our brain, and this is actually the last part of the brain to develop. Research used to tell us it developed around, the mid-20s. Now they're saying it finishes developing late 20s, early 30s. We all actually have executive functions. We have executive function strengths, and we have executive function weaknesses, but we don't all have executive function deficits. Usually we're going to see deficits in individuals that have ADHD, autism, learning disabilities. We can see it in depression, anxiety, individuals that are born premature. That can be another group that we see it with. But the reality is anyone can have an executive function deficit. They do not need a diagnosable disability. So I think sometimes that's surprising to people because I think that often we're attaching it to a diagnosis. So we can also have really smart individuals that have executive function deficits. I think this is really hard for some people to grasp. Quite often, if I'm talking to a parent for a referral, they'll tell me, how bright their child is. But the reality is I really want to know what their working memory is like, what's their processing speed like, because I know that, working memory actually of executive functions is actually the #1 predictor of academic success. So it's not IQ, it's actually an executive function. Also that deficit can cause a delay of up to 3 years. I think this is even more important to note when you're looking at a young college student, an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, because they could be functioning in some of their executive functions like they're 15 or 16. And so really understanding that executive function deficits can be there even if an individual is bright. So sometimes executive functions, I think, can be confusing. There are experts out there and some people out there that say that there are a specific number of executive functions. And this is actually not true. The truth is there's actually no definitive list of executive functions. Now, there are executive functions that we tend to talk about more, And I think a lot of us know what they are. I'll mention them in a few minutes, but there is no definitive list. In fact, one of the executive functions I think that some people don't acknowledge enough is attention. If someone has attention difficulties, they must have ADHD. But the reality is that someone can have attention difficulties that are related to that executive function, but not have ADHD. So these are 4 things that I really want you to keep in mind as we go through tonight. The first is that a professional diagnosis in an executive function disorder will not get a student support in school. Now, the first thing some of you who have been around schools a lot will say to me, or have been in the mental health field will say, Krista, yeah, the executive function disorder actually doesn't exist. It's not in the DSM. You would be correct. Although I think if you would talk to a majority of psychologists and neuropsychologists, they would tell you it does exist. It just hasn't made it to the manual yet. But students that don't have that diagnosis of where it's not being talked about, that doesn't mean executive function disorder does not equal having a 504 or an IEP. It's not enough. 89% of students with ADHD have difficulties in at least one executive function. If you're a teacher or a coach or a tutor, and you have about 30 students, at least 3 of them are probably going to have ADHD. And so we really are all kind of being exposed to individuals that have executive function deficits. School-age children that were born premature, very premature, have executive function deficits compared to their full-term peers. As I said, that's kind of how I got here. But these deficits are actually still found in adulthood. Many years ago, I had a college student, and I started to work with him and started to read his psychological, and he really had the profile of somebody who was born premature. There were certain things that were jumping out to me. And so nowhere in the report did it talk about this. And so I asked him, and he's like, oh yeah, I was born at 29 weeks. So even as an adult, I could see some of those executive function challenges being presented, even though he was a young adult. And then this one, young adult students that have recovered from mild COVID, keyword being recovered, were found later to have executive function deficits. So no matter who you're working with, most of the time when we're talking about students, we're thinking younger kids, but, when we're looking at this, I'm thinking of younger students, I'm thinking high school, I'm looking at college, medical school, law school, right? And even adults, right? So we are definitely coming across these challenges with everyone that we're working with. This is why we need to really understand executive functions. Having that baseline, I don't think is important. It's not working anymore, having that baseline. We really need a deeper understanding. So I'm gonna have you go back to that QR code. And now I'd like to have an idea of how much do you know about executive functions? I'd really like to have an idea of how much experience you have. So if you could go back there and go ahead. Do you know it all? And you're just kind of here to see what it's like, what I'm going to talk about? Do you know quite a bit? You think like you have a really good sense of what executive functions are and how they are. You should see it now in case that didn't pop up. I just had to push the button. So you know it all, you know quite a bit, you know a little bit, right? I've heard of it, or I have no idea. And let's see. Looking at quite a few people that either have quite a bit. A couple of people know it all. Now, why are you here if you know it all? I'm kidding. All right, it's a little bit, so it sounds like a lot of you know quite a bit about executive function. There are a few people that say they have an average knowledge of it. So I wanted to kind of get this idea of where you were before I kind of jumped into the biology. I personally think the biology of understanding this is really crucial for a couple of reasons. One is, I think that as an adult, when we talk to kids, if and adults, right? If we're asking them to try something or to think of something, and we're not really giving a reason, it's really harder to get people to be open-minded to try things if they don't understand the why. The second reason why is because most of our individuals are referred to as being lazy. Whoops, sorry, wrong button. Lazy, not being motivated, right? So it's not uncommon to hear that they're, have no motivation or that they don't care. Last year, I had a student and I had, a teacher requested a meeting, and teacher wanted to meet because the student just doesn't seem to care. She sits in class, but she really doesn't seem to care. And it wasn't that she didn't care. It was the fact that, she was being distracted by internal thoughts, and, she was kind of daydreaming and checking out, and it presented like she didn't care, but it wasn't that she didn't care. And so understanding the biology, I think, really helps us understand, why these things are happening and that it's not purposeful behavior. I think that is so key, stressing the fact that it's not purposeful behavior. So I want to start off with some neurons. Anytime that we do a task, neurons talk to other neurons. And we are born with most of our neurons, but they are still developing in the frontal lobe and the cerebellum. This space that I have circled is called the synapse. And basically, this is the space between two neurons. In individuals that have executive function deficits, definitely in ADHD, the research has shown this, but I'm starting to see some other research that's coming out that's noticing this in other things. That space is actually larger, which means it's taking longer for one neuron to talk to another neuron. So how do we see this, right? So we all know that if you're in a classroom and someone asks a question, that you're supposed to raise your hand. Actually, if you're in a Zoom meeting and someone asks you a question, we're kind of expected to raise a hand, right? If it's a larger group of people. We know that. And our brain is able to carry that message, and we're able to follow through with that message. But when that message is taking longer to get from one place to another, we then are ending up with the student who's blurting out the answer because that message hasn't gotten to its final point yet, and they're blurting out the answer instead of raising their hand. So that's one of the things to consider. Another thing to consider is neuropathways. And neuropathways, you can see there's 3 different age group here, right? Again, if we have a task, we have a neuropathway that task is following, right? When the neurons are talking to the other neurons. At birth, we don't have many, right? We have some, but we don't have many. But between birth and 6 years old, billions and billions are actually growing. And anytime we learn a task, we're building a neuropathway. But the reality is that if we kept on going at that rate, our head would probably get to the point where our body wouldn't be able to carry it. So what happens is the brain starts to decide if it needs a neuropathway or it doesn't. And how it decides that is, do I need this task? Am I using this? And so, like I like to say to some of my students, this could possibly be that if you're having difficulties writing in your planner, that unfortunately that skill is being pruned. Now, the good thing about our brain is that it is it's plastic, right? We call it plasticity. And so we can learn a skill at any time, but it does become harder if it's already been pruned, which is why early intervention is so key. I know a lot of people are hesitant to work with younger children. And yes, we absolutely need to have a model where parents are involved when we're working with younger children. But the reality is that early intervention is really key. We want to catch some of these things before they've already been pruned. So this was another thing that I found this week, and I really liked this. It talks about one of the circuits in the brain, and this is the circuits that's going from the prefrontal cortex to the cerebellum to the basal ganglia. And this circuit is playing an important role in cognition and learning. But what has been found is that there is a reduced connection in adults with ADHD, which means that we're having difficulties with the circuit that is part of that frontal lobe. So again, we're not just talking about younger individuals. We are talking about individuals at every age can have difficulties with that frontal lobe and executive functions. The reward circuit's also another circuit that I really like to talk about. Most research on it has been in relationship to ADHD. Again, there are some more current research coming out that is showing a relationship to some other things that do have executive function deficits. So we're not just seeing this with ADHD. I can tell you for a fact, I have individuals who do not have ADHD that really struggle with this as well. And what's happening is the brain, dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter in the circuit, actually it's having difficulties. Some say that the brain doesn't have enough of it, right? And so it's harder to motivate individuals to do things. And so the reward network or circuit is actually another really important part of building skills, in my opinion, because if we have somebody who's not motivated and we have somebody who's not getting that intrinsic reward out of learning something, we really kind of have to bump it up in order to help them learn that skill. So if we look at some of these biological reasons, and these are just a few, this is why it's really important that we understand executive functions. And in the course, I go even deeper into this, but I wanted to kind of give some baseline information. Again, this is not purposeful behavior. I wish I could have a huge poster that I just carried around every single time, I worked with a family member or I worked with a school to let them know that kids are not doing these things on purpose. Adults aren't doing these things on purpose. There's actually stuff going on in the brain, which makes it hard to learn some of these skills and some of these tasks. Okay, so executive functions are not simple. They're actually pretty complex. And we'll learn a little bit more about that when we talk about the executive function scenarios. But first, I wanted to talk about some of the executive functions. So I start with these 3 executive functions because these are the 3 that are most often mentioned in research. We have working memory. This is our ability to take in information, manipulate it, and do something with it. How are we going to see this? So this could be someone who's listening to someone else, trying to decide what is the most important, and then they're writing that down while still getting information. At home, we could see this, say, like a parent says to a child, today you have soccer practice. I want you to come home, go upstairs, get changed, then come downstairs, get a snack, fill up your water bottle, get your cleats on, and meet me at the door in a half hour. And a half hour later, the parent goes to try to find that child, and they're upstairs, they have their earbuds on, they're listening to music. They've changed, but that's as far as they've made it. And, one of the reasons is because they've forgotten the rest of the list, so while they were trying to act it out, they have lost the rest of it. So that's working memory. Inhibition is our ability to manage ourselves. This includes our body as well as thoughts and actions. The other day, I was observing a student in kindergarten, and I actually was really happy to see that the school was really working with the student. He was the type of kid who often was not sitting in the chair. He would be working, but he might be kneeling on the chair, and then standing up on one leg, or he would be completely standing because he really had difficulty sitting still. But as long as he was working, the teachers were really kind of letting him do his thing, which was really, really nice to see. So this is one thing, or this could be an individual who's not thinking about the consequences. So they'll go ahead and do something, not remembering what the consequence was and just going ahead and doing it. Flexibility is a really fascinating executive function, in my opinion. This is our ability to shift between different goals and tasks in a changing environment. But we also could have the same environment, but the goal is different in that environment. So that's what flexibility is. I think a really easy example would be the kid who's really excited about going on a field trip, really excited, and then finds out it's raining and kind of has a meltdown because they were going on a field trip. That's what they were doing, right? Another example might be, a scenario where you're in a group and kind of like the group management is like the first 5 minutes of the meeting kind of is like open and everybody gets to talk, and there's not structure to that first 5 minutes, and then the rule is after the first 5 minutes then the leader begins, right? But if that leader's not there and someone else is there, that same routine is not going to be followed. The individual that has difficulty with flexibility is really going to struggle with that structure being different. So that's flexibility. So these are the three that we really hear about the most in research. But now let's talk about a couple of the ones that are most often known as executive functions. Whoops, sorry. So we have planning, right? Planning is an executive function that many people know about, and organization. Now, I want to pause there because I always say if there's a career attached to an executive function, that's a really difficult executive function. If you think about it, we have planners, we have wedding planners, we have party planners, we have administrative assistants that really plan completely for the people that they're working for. We also have professional organizers. I'm personally very excited because tomorrow I have somebody who's coming to give me an estimate on my closet. And I'm really excited to see what their vision is going to be of how I can be better organized in my closet. So, but if there is a career attached, these are not simple executive functions. We also have time management. Now, in the course, I really kind of take this a step further because I really feel that you cannot have time management until you have time perception and you're able to sense time and tell time. You need to have those two things before you can manage time. And so in the course, you'll be talking about all three of those things, not just the management of time. We also, the ability to prioritize. This is another one that we hear about a lot and where some individuals have difficulties doing that. So that's another one. And I'm really sorry, I keep on going backwards. For some reason, when I was in the smaller screen earlier, I was able to just hit my space bar, but it's not letting me do that. And self-regulation. So I'm trying to regulate myself while all of this is happening. But anyways, that is another executive function that we hear about a lot. So I wanted to introduce those executive functions. Again, remember, there's not a definitive list of executive functions, but there does tend to be certain executive functions that we talk about more so than others. But there is not a definitive list. So how do you become specialized in executive function? Like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I really saw that was missing from a lot of the training I went through was this ability to really go deep into executive functions. And that was really my goal when developing this course, understanding the biology and the science and the brain science, but then also having strategies and techniques that we can utilize both at home and at school. So that was one of the things that was really important to me. So the course will have two parts, and within the two parts, you're going to have modules that are on working memory, inhibition, flexibility, planning, time management, the ability to prioritize, organization, self-regulation, and then these two topics of perfectionism and procrastination. I really feel like those are two things that are really, does executive function impact them, or do they impact executive function? But either way, there's a relationship and they really need to be discussed and understood in order to support individuals with executive functions. Now I kind of want to walk through what the course is going to look like. So the first thing we're going to have is a web portal. In the web portal, we are going to have a variety of different activities and videos. And you can see here the module on flexibility and the one on working memory. So activities, videos, and also resources. Those activities are not just going to be activities that are for your students. There's also going to be activities where you're going to experience that executive function. I really want people to be able to experience it, understand it. That's just so important. Also, the brain science. I love the brain science. I really do a lot of research and present a lot of research. I think it's really important to understand that. And so that will be included. And then we'll also have a workbook. The workbook is going to have your activities in there, but it's also going to have questions and different things like that. And I realized I skipped a thing. This is an example of an activity that you will have to experience the executive function. And then these are some of the activities that are going to be ready for your students. Now, I do keep on using the word students, and I know that somebody earlier asked about adults. In my experience, you can apply a majority of these things to adults. It's a very easy transition. And so this is an activity that's based on Eisenhower's priority matrix. And then the next activity is actually in the flexibility module and talks about, being able to do things in different ways. So back to the workbook. The workbook is going to have a very detailed menu that will also have the notes, places to take notes, as well as questions. So there's going to be questions about the modules that you will complete. Strategies and techniques are going to take place in videos. I purposely picked an animated program because I wanted you to see the strategy and technique in motion. And so you're going to be able to see how that strategy and technique is actually being applied in a video scenario. There will be live question and answer sessions. So as you are learning, we're also going to have those live question and answer sessions. We're also going to have case studies. One of the things I've realized over time is that some individuals, attend trainings and they might attend it, but how much are they really grasping from it? And I can tell you that I've seen people go through these programs that are unable to then transfer that learned information into application. I really want to make sure that people are doing that. And so one of the ways that we're going to do that is by having a case study that's going to summarize everything that you have learned in that module. There's also going to be a one-to-one course review. So you will have that course review, again, to make sure that you're understanding the information. And there's going to be an annual training email logo. This is going to be a course that you're going to have to renew every year. One of the reasons I decided to do that was the reality is we're constantly doing research, especially on the brain, and we're constantly learning new things. For example, most of us a couple of years ago were told that executive functions, the prefrontal cortex, finished developing in mid-20s. Now, from more current research, we know that it's late 20s, early 30s. So I want to make sure that you're getting the most current research. There also will be additional strategies and techniques, especially as I've created some of this course material. I've realized it's way too long. And so I've actually already creating some stuff for the year 2. And then also there will be additional material. So all of that will be in year 2. So again, you're going to have all of these different modules. So all of these different things will be addressed in the module, but then in the course, but I also wanted to make sure that processing speed was there. Processing speed has close relationship to executive functions. And so it is a skill, a function that I really think that people need to understand. And so processing speed is going to be in there, as well as multitasking. I hate to give it away, but we actually cannot multitask. And then metacognition. Some people think metacognition is an executive function, and I've been guilty of that in the past, but it actually isn't. And it really comes down to the fact of where it's located in the brain. That's why it's not an executive function, but it is a very important cognitive skill. And so we'll definitely include an entire module about that. So these are all the different modules that you're going to get. And those last three are ones that I'm including if you book today, the course. Here's some feedback I've received in the course. The first one was really great to hear from, because this individual was actually looking at a couple of other different executive function courses and decided to go with mine because she felt she was getting exposure to some of the videos, parts of the modules through another program that she was attending. And she felt like the videos were really concise and that the strategies and techniques were not just generic tips, that we were going beyond that. And so that was the feedback that she gave. The second individual, again, I kind of made sure I included this, was because this individual was talking about how she's using the information that she learned and she's transferring it over not only to her students, but she's also transferring it over to adults and to her post-stroke senior relative. I actually have a physician who refers to me many students that have concussion histories. I've also had patients that he's referred to me that have brain disorders, different things that are impacting executive function. And so these things are not, again, just for individuals with some of the known things like ADHD and autism and things like that. Executive functions really do impact many groups of people. And then the last one was an individual who was a tutor running a summer program and was able to utilize these, what she was learning in the course, to assist her students and to understand them better. So you can see here a variety of different professionals utilizing this in different ways. So it really can be really helpful for many different people. So here I have, to make it really easy for you, you can get out that phone again and hit that QR code, and that's going to take you to the registration, so that all you have to do is do that, and you will be able to So right now, part 1 is $495. Part 2 is also going to be $495. These are introductory rates. I would imagine, in fact, I have no doubt, they're going to go up probably, especially after I go through the ICF registration for part 2. As of right now, part 1, which is fully released, has 8 hours of ICF core competencies and 2 hours of resource development. So if you are looking for some ICF hours, they are available here. And so that will take you to that. Okay, so I promised you that I would go over some scenarios and you would be able to take some information away. So here is our first scenario. Students have been assigned an essay. They create an outline and then they have to start the assignment. You find that 15 minutes into the activity, the student is staring at a blank page. Why haven't they asked for help? Now, first of all, if you're a coach or a tutor, you're probably being like, why am I being, introduced to this teacher challenge, right? But I cannot tell you how many times I've talked about this with my students. So this really is not just applicable for the classroom. So your student's staring at a blank page, or as a coach, you're learning from a tutor or a parent that the student is staring at a blank page for long periods of time. They seem to be stuck, but why aren't they asking for help? I cannot tell you how often I hear from teachers, why won't they ask for help? But remember when I said that executive functions are complex? Well, one of the reasons they're complex is because they often work together. So is this individual struggling with regulation? Are they afraid to ask for help? Or maybe they don't know how to ask for help. Could it be that they're worrying that their question is stupid and they don't want to say it out loud, in front of their peers, right? Could also be working memory, since they're not remembering what worked last time when they asked for help or the last time they did the task. This can sometimes lead to task initiation challenges, right? So they're not getting started on that task because of the working memory or the regulation issues. And this is all before we even get to planning and organizing, right? So all of these things can be happening, not even talking about planning or organizing. So how can we support someone like this? Well, first of all, just reminding you again, executive functions are not simple. You just saw how they were working together. They're complex and they work together. So strategies. Create a cheat sheet on the steps to ask for help. This can be digital. It could be a sticky note on an individual's desk or laptop. These are some of the resources. Be sympathetic to a student's question. It often takes a lot of emotional regulation for someone to ask for help. Unfortunately, many of our students have had negative experiences, or they have perceived these experiences as negative, and so they're very hesitant to ask for help. But let's give them the directions on how to ask for help. So the first step is stating the problem. I'm struggling to get my paper started. The second step is going to be state what you did to solve the problem. I'm sure probably all of us can remember being a child and being, asking for help and being told, well, what have you tried? Right? So what did you do to already solve the problem? I looked at my outline, but I still cannot come up with the first sentence. Exact help you need. Can you help me brainstorm some ideas for my first sentence? Once I get started, I will be good, right? In fact, I had a college student last week who told me, if I can get that first sentence on the paper, I'm good to go, but I have to have that first sentence. Now, as you noticed here in the cheat sheet, I not only had the steps, but I had examples of the steps. And this is so our students know how to apply the steps, because some of them, again, especially if we have somebody who's struggling with regulation, once that anxiety or nervousness takes over, sometimes they can kind of forget things. And so we want to make sure that they have that there if they need to know some examples, and so they can apply that. So that's the first scenario. And again, that dealt with many executive functions, and some of them, were interacting with each other. Our second scenario is a math situation. So we have a student who's really struggling with memorization of multiplication and also math word problems. The teacher often gives timed quizzes, and often the student doesn't do well. Now, I can tell you, this is a challenge I have with students, that timed piece of all ages. And so, a lot of our students, in fact, I've been seeing this a lot lately, where I have students that do really well on a test, do really well on homework, but on timed quizzes, they're really struggling. And so just that timing piece can really be hard for some of our students. So if we just take a quick look at this, it looks like our students unable to memorize facts, right? That's the problem, right? But are they struggling with regulation? Are they nervous about being timed? When I used to do the neuropsych testing, I could tell when a student was getting nervous if they were timed. And there were many times I literally had to take that timer and put it under the desk so that they could not see it, but I could still get that thing timed, right? So it could be that they're nervous. Also, they could be worried about being, the last person, right, to finish. And that can make it really hard to remember when you have kind of those thoughts going on. It could be working memory. They're not remembering the facts in order to complete the problems. And this can be even harder for students with lower processing speeds. So what can we do, right, for this situation? Well, first of all, understanding that timing piece, because we're going to see that timing piece not just in students, even sometimes if I'm working with adults and we're talking about a schedule, sometimes the minute we talk about time, they completely shut down. And so sometimes we have to use routines without time. So understanding that timing can be the barrier, and understanding that students with anxiety, processing speed challenges, and working memory, really struggle with that. Let the students use a calculator. It's more about them understanding the operation. It's less about how long it's taking them. And then for the word problems, allow a word list like this. I've had younger kids in 4th grade, 5th grade use this, but I've also had some high school students use it. Some of our students really have difficulties transferring, numbers into, operations into words. And so having that list there can be really, really helpful. We can easily put it on the desk, or have something that they can take out when they're having a problem like this. So those are 2 scenarios around executive functions. In the course, there are so many. I personally feel that when we work with students, no matter what our role is, we play the role as an advocate. We not only are playing a role of advocating for them, but we're also teaching them to advocate for themselves. And so being able to transfer skills from school to home or work to home, that's really important, because many of our clients really struggle in both places, not just one. So those are the scenarios I have for you. I wanted to give you a little bit of a taste. Here's that QR code to register for it. But I wanted, as we get ready for questions, I'm going to open up questions. I want to kind of do something fun. And what I'm going to do, wait, let me get it started on my end, is we're going to do another QR code thing, which is going to let us know 1 or 2 words of something that you're taking away from tonight. What is something you've learned, or something that you think is going to impact your relationship with students or individuals that you're working with that have executive function challenges or deficits? So if you could get out your phone, take a picture of that QR code. I'll give you a couple of minutes for that. And then what I'm going to do is actually share it so that you can kind of see what everybody is posting. You don't see the person, you just see the words. So don't worry about that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share that, and then I'm going to open up questions. Oops. Okay, let's do that. All right. And let me share this. Okay, so there we see understanding plasticity. So we're going to see your ideas as they pop up, but I'm also going to open up the question and answer. So do you have a research source for the statement about the young adult recovered from COVID and showing executive function deficits? I do. I do not have it right here, Melody, but I will note this and definitely send it to you. There's actually been quite a few articles on it. I know the first one that I saw was actually a group out of Canada, but I will definitely get back to you about that. Second question, having neuroscience or biology to back up what I already know is so helpful. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm a geek, so I tend to love it, but I love when I hear students use words like neurons and neural pathways and different things like that, because I just really think that they're more likely to be willing to be open-minded. And so I love that. I absolutely love it. Any other questions? I'm going to open it up so that if you want to, I will let you talk, because it's a little weird with just me being able to talk. I don't know if I can do it for everybody. Let's see. I'm not sure how to do it, but I know I can do it if you want to talk. If you want to ask a question, I can let you talk. So. Oh, there we can do. Okay. So if anybody, I'm just going to ask you guys, but you're welcome. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it's very weird for me not to be able to talk. I mean, to people. So, does anybody have any other questions? I really appreciate everybody coming out today. Kind of going through. And it's so great to see so many familiar faces too. So I appreciate everybody that has come also to yes, Liz, I will be sending out a recording. Absolutely. So I will be doing that. All right. Oh, that's a really good one. Okay. Sharon, do you want to ask your question out loud? Let me see if I can. There you go. If you don't want to, you don't have to either, but
No, I can't.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I know an extremely bright woman. I don't know, about 43. I'm 68. It's not me. But despite having psychologists who are supposed to help her, she some days can't even remember to open a box. And so, how do you find someone who genuinely can deal with that as opposed to an average psychologist who says they can?
That's a really good question. I think it's really. What is your role, Sharon? How do you work with individuals?
I'm a tutor for Hebrew reading. And
Okay.
so most of my students are actually between 2nd and 8th grade, but once in a while, somebody comes along who never had it as a child.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
so there are coaches out there. So there are coaches that can really help individuals really be able to achieve some of these skills. It doesn't just have to be about academics. There's lots of individuals that just work with adults. In fact, unfortunately, I see many of my fabulous peers transferring over to adults. But you can definitely find somebody that way. If it was a psychologist, if they needed therapy, I would just really make sure that interviewing the therapist and asking them what their experience is when working with individuals with executive function challenges. And then, can maybe some examples of how they would support someone. I do know that there are some ADHD coaches that are psychologists as well. I'm not sure I've met any academic coaches, but you wouldn't want an academic coach probably. But I think that interviewing and then looking at a coach would probably be my recommendation. That would be the direction I would move in.
interestingly enough, the question is sometimes posed by parents who have somebody that they're related to, their own brother or sister, aunt, uncle, and they want this answer from me. I'm a Hebrew reading tutor. So that's why sometimes I ask.
Yeah. And I think, if you're looking for kids, there's a lot of great coaching organizations depending on the challenge. For ADHD coaching, there's ACO, which is the ADHD coaching organization. I know that JST coaching, which is an ADHD coach trainer, has a list of coaches. I know that my local community has an ADHD group that has coaches. And then there's also Gretchen Wegner, who is actually an academic coach who has coaches. So there's different resources out there.
Okay, thank you.
Terry asked what the module headings are. The module headings are actually the executive functions. So going to do it on the executive functions that I've discussed today. And then also those additional topics, metacognition, processing speed, procrastination, perfectionism, multitasking. The rest of them are executive functions. Hopefully, eventually, I really want to do one on if you're a professional, a coach, or even a teacher or tutor, like how do you take psychological testing and utilize it in a coaching practice? That's something that I really want to do. Not that I'm licensed and I'm not a psychologist, but I do have experience and I do utilize them a lot in my coaching. So Okay, Jane asked when the course begins. Part 1, you can do that right now. The in-person sessions, I will be starting to schedule in February. It's probably going to be Monday evenings, and I'm going to kind of fool around with the time to see the best time for everybody so that I can make sure that I'm accommodating people on both coasts. So part 2, my goal is March 1st, is to have it completely finished. I've been recently working on it and I keep on changing it. Perfectionism, right? We all struggle with it. Tracy, do you talk about lifestyle supports and underlying health issues that impact executive functions? Tracy, let me find you to let you talk so that I can get more information. Oh, I saw you and I lost you. Sorry.
Hey, can you hear me?
Oh,
I unmuted
oh, I can. Perfect. Oh, yes. Perfect.
they're especially, well, for kids too, but adults too, there are underlying health issues that really impact executive functions for diet does it, underlying health issues like thyroid disease, autoimmune issues, those type of things. And I was wondering if you talk about those.
I don't. I don't, and I don't know if I will go into that direction just because there is so much to consider. I mean, I think when we go from diet to thyroid challenges, and different things like that, whereas I find it extremely intriguing, the research that's out there also, we have, schizophrenia and different other things that have that relationship with executive functions too. It would be so extensive. I'm not really sure I could give it the attention it really needs. And so I probably will not be.
It's amazing, even with some of my clients, just to ask them to make a couple of minor tweaks. I have a client, 70 years old, and she was really strong. Even in our calls, she couldn't track our conversation and stay on topic and follow the conversation and look at the camera. I mean, it was really something, and I was really concerned about her. And then one day I mentioned, had she taken a look, I noticed she was baking. She was Christmas baking, and it got really bad. And I said, have you considered staying away from some simple carbohydrates to see it? And she said, what are you talking about? I told her. She said, I've been drinking a lot of wine lately too. Stopped wine and sugar. And for a couple of days, she stopped eating sugar and drinking wine. And she was a completely different person at our next meeting. And she said, I can't believe what a difference that made. And it didn't, I'm not saying that it cured her. That was not a cure. It's just, it's the impact of those things is so amazing.
It absolutely is. I would agree 100%. I mean, I know that when I'm doing one-to-one coaching, I address some of these things. I mean, I know one of the big ones for me is like, did you eat breakfast, and did you have high protein at breakfast? Because that makes a huge difference, right? So absolutely. I just don't know. And if a course like this, I could really, when I go into these things, I really go 100%. I do extensive research, and I really try to share that all with you. And I just think that would be really hard to go into that direction, but they are definitely areas that definitely are so important.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for attending. I appreciate it. Okay. Let's see. Liz said, I found that some therapists and psychiatrists and coaches work hand in hand in support of the individual. Absolutely. If I know that someone I'm working with has a therapist, I will absolutely be trying to communicate with that therapist or that other professional. I think that in coaching, especially in coaching, but I think even in teaching and even in tutoring, right? I mean, when we're working with someone, all areas of their life are really involved. And so the more wraparound services that we can do, I think it's actually better for our individuals. So Yes. Amy, would you have any suggestions for executive function resources for adult writers, either process or various parts of the creativity process and how they relate to executive function? Really good question. And one of the reasons that's a great question, and I just got new flooring, and so all my books are packed up, but there is a great book out there that is all about executive functions in relationship to writing. It's a really great book. I've only kind of skimmed it, but I've used it quite a few times. I don't know if that would be, it's pretty heavy reading, but it definitely explains some of the impact that executive function is making. But it's a great question. I mean, it's really shocking how much working memory is involved in writing. Working memory is actually related to writing in every single stage of it. So I hope I answered that. Amy, your second one, do you want to, your second comment was, oh, that's a cool topic. Do you chat with coaches about that? I'm not sure which one you were talking about.
Sorry, I realized that was, I have been experimenting with some online neuropsych testing in relation to another program I'm doing for myself. And I would love to have an offline conversation with you because of the interest in neuroscience and neuropsych testing, if that's something you're open to.
Yeah, absolutely. Just reach out, just shoot me an email, and
Perfect.
absolutely.
It was, yeah, realized it didn't tag the time or the context.
Yeah, I love, like I said, I always request a psychological or neuropsychological if a client has it. I've also referred clients out for them. I had a student who I was working with in law school, and when we talked about the areas that she was really struggling in, it really seemed to me, and again, I'm not a diagnostician, I'm not a psychologist, but it really seemed like she was really struggling in processing speed. And so I recommended she go for testing, and she did, and, was a really bright young lady. IQ came back and really reflected that. And then her processing speed was like 85, which obviously is below average. And so once we put some accommodations in place, and we talk about some of these things in the modules, Notability is a great tool. Once she put that in place, it was like her whole experience in law school changed. So Melody asks, what's the cost to renew each year? It's not going to be the same as redoing the course the first time. I have not narrowed down an exact price though, but it's definitely not going to be the same price as taking it the first time. If I miss a live meeting in the course, are they all recorded? Yes, they will all be recorded. Absolutely. I'm one of those people, because I'm still seeing clients. I know that all of our schedules tend to be chaotic, and so I definitely will record. If someone has no sense of time and poor sense of time management, and that person has ADHD, is the executive function deficit the cause or the result of ADHD? Wow, that's a great question, Margaret. I don't, just with that question, I really don't know if we could answer that. We really would have to, I'm a really firm believer in testing. It's ironic. I mentioned the kindergarten kid who I observed last week, and his pediatrician or his teachers did the Vanderbilt. First of all, he wasn't aged old enough for the Vanderbilt, but the Vanderbilt's a questionnaire. And I think it's a great first step. But I think that if we really want to explore how someone is functionally performing, we really have to go into psychological testing, especially when we're looking at ADHD, because we're going to be looking at different types of attention, and we're going to get information like that. Also, I just had a referral for an individual who has multiple areas of challenges, including dyscalculia, and she also is struggling in poor time management. So it would be very difficult to just answer that question as it is. We really would need more additional information. I would say that, if you're working with someone like that, I think that, exploring that sense of time would be really important. Do they have a sense of time at all? Are they sensing time? Are they feeling time? Are they aware of their surroundings? And these are all the different things that will be discussed in the time management module, because again, like I mentioned earlier, you really have to be able to sense and tell time before you can manage it, in my opinion. And do we interact? Yeah, so in the course, there will be interaction within the course. In the portal, you have the ability to write in there. And then with the question and answer sessions, I really want it to be interactive. I don't want it just to be me talking. I definitely want interaction there. And perhaps as the course evolves too, we'll come up with some other different ideas. But yes, I definitely want, because I think we all gain experience when we talk about things together, right? I mean, how people experience things different can be really helpful. So I think I got to everybody's question. Is there anybody else who had any questions? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. No, I didn't. Oh, it's just somebody saying thank you. I appreciate it. This is my passion. I'm hoping that everybody gets that sense. And I'm really hoping that, especially since COVID, I've seen so many executive function coaches pop up. And I do think it's people that have gotten some training in executive functions, I would hope, but I'm not sure they have a deep enough training to really apply those things to some of the challenges that we come across in coaching. So if that is all, thank you so much for attending. I'll hang around for a couple more minutes in case anybody else has any questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for attending. And I wish you all the best when working with your students and adults.